So this is how I've chosen to lay out the box with electronics. There's no real rule here. It's just what I thought would work well. So I'm just going to show you the positions of all the different elements, and then what I'll do is I will start assembling it. So first of all, we have our big power supply. That's mounted at the bottom of the box, upright like that. I have a power socket that is going to go into the side. I have a emergency stop button that will go onto this side, which will be facing the front of the machine, or towards the front of the machine, so that I can easily access it. We have some of the stepper drivers. This is a big one driving 2 motors that's standing upright. The reason for that is because it has a heatsink on the top, so when this box stands up straight, this heatsink is going to point towards the top. The heat's going to rise and it's going to be extracted with this fan. I'll get back to that shortly. Then we have 2 smaller stepper drivers. These are mounted to the bottom of the case. We have the Arduino Uno board, and it has a hole on this side so that I can access the USB port. And these are the plugs and sockets that's going to come from the different motors, and then we'll be wiring from there. We'll be wiring our stepper motors, our power supply, and our Arduino, so that we can see if this machine works. On the lid, which is going to fit on top like that. The only thing I'm fixing to that is going to be the, I think it's an 80mm fan, and I'm going to be fixing it in this position, which is more or less over the stepper drivers that have the heat sinks, and that is going to allow, that's going to exhaust all the hot air from the case. So I just want to show you how I laid this out, so that you can get a better idea. I have the Arduino over here, then I have 2 smaller stepper drivers in this position. I have the larger stepper driver over here, power supply. I have a on-off switch and an IEC power socket, and then on this side I have a emergency stop button. Now you can also mount the emergency stop button outside of the box. I've just decided to mount mine here, as I'll put my box in a position where I can easily get to this. Right, so inside the kit you get a little bag, and it has everything you need to mount all of these different parts. So you'll see I've already, after drilling the holes, I've already installed these little nylon standoffs, and they simply just bolt to the back with the included little lock nuts that's in that bag, and then everything else also just secures to the bottom of this box. So the largest stepper driver as well, it has two large bolts, and there's also bolts included for the power supply. Right, now I'm not going to show you in precise detail exactly how I put this all together. I think it should be pretty self-explanatory. In the front of the box, as mentioned before, well, I'm not sure if I have mentioned before, but if I haven't, here goes again. We have the 3 sockets, plugs and sockets. These are going to come from the wire that we connected to our motors. So we're going to have 2 motors connected to one and 1 motor each to the other 2. Right, so these holes are roughly about 16 millimeters in diameter. Okay, and then obviously, you know, to make the cutouts for the power sockets and switch and for the emergency stop, I'm not going to give you specific dimensions for that because, you know, the versions that you get of these might change. I'll put links into the description for the ones that I've used. Alright, so just to finish this off then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to install this last stepper driver. But before that I do that, I also just want to show you the USB, the hole that I drilled for the USB plug. Now you can see here from the one I drilled it a little bit too low, so I'm going to have to use a file or something just to make that hole a little bit bigger so that I can actually fit my USB cable into that plug. Right, so let's just position this driver into place, and then I'm going to use these little small screws that also come in the packets, in one of the packets, and I'm going to actually put these in first because they're a little bit difficult to get into the holes otherwise. Right, so I'm going to position them like that. It's a flathead screwdriver. Right, so you're just going to secure all 4, and then you're going to do that with this stepper motor driver and also the Arduino board. So in order to mark these out, you see I've showed before how I drilled the holes, but in order to mark these out, you're just going to place it flat onto the bottom of the box, and you're going to take a sharp pencil or a Koki or a pen and just mark those holes out, and that's where you're going to drill the holes. Right, so you don't want to over tighten these screws, otherwise you might strip out the thread in the nylon standoffs. Right, I'll put the screen a little bit later. Okay, so the other thing I want to show you is the lid of the box. So when this fits on top, let me just reposition my camera slightly. So when you put the lid on the top, okay, you'll see I've positioned the fan over here. Now my box is going to stand up straight like this. This is going to point towards the front of the machine. Okay, so with that being the top of the box, then you want all hot air to exhaust towards the top, because hot air rises, exhaust towards the top. And that, as mentioned before, is also why I orientated the stepper driver with its heat sink facing to the top. Hot air rises, get extracted by the fan, and the same with these. For this fan, this is an 80mm fan, so I just drilled I used a hole saw, I think, just to drill out this hole. Okay, I can't remember the dimensions right now, but just get it as close as possible to the dimensions of the fan. Put the fan down on the hole, centered it, marked the holes, and then just drilled and assembled the whole thing with this grill in place as well. It's a very straightforward procedure. Right, so what we're going to do now is, now that we have assembled all or fixed all the parts to the box, we are going to start doing the wiring. Now this is where the fun starts. So one of the things that you want to do before you start tackling the wiring is to print out the this wiring guide. I will leave a link in the description where you can go to download it, and this will show you step for step how to wire all the different components. So it's really easy to follow. All the components are laid out, and it shows you exactly from which pin on the Arduino you need to lay wires to your different stepper motors, and the power supply and the different motors. So what we're going to do now is we're first just going to start with laying wires from the Arduino to our different stepper motors. Now what I am using for that is this. Okay, so now this I bought from Communica, and I think it's something like a 40 strand wave cable, 40 strand flat cable like this. So very easy to use. They come with pins already attached to either end, which will make our installation a lot easier, because essentially all that happens is it just pops straight into the Arduino. And they peel off very easily. So you can just peel it off like that, and then you can use each one for a different purpose. So I'm going to peel off a few of them. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my schematic that I have here, and then I'm going to just find the correct pin on the Arduino and connect it up to my stepper drivers. So I'm not going to go into complete detail here, because really if you follow this guide there is no way that you can go wrong. Just print it out, follow it exactly, wire everything up exactly as it is here. What I will do, however, is just to show you, you know, once I have actually wired up, I'll do it in different steps. So I'm going to wire the Arduino to this different stepper motor drivers, and then I'll stop and I'll show you what I've done. Then I'll move over to connecting up things like ground wires, power wires, the power supply, this the main switch, the emergency stop switch, and then of course all the stepper motors that come back to the stepper motor drivers. So let's so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the wiring, and then I'll come back to you a little bit later and show you what I've done. Right, so you can see that I've done quite a little bit of wiring already, and we're starting to get there. So most of these wires coming from the Arduino board are there to control the stepper drivers. And then what I've also done is these black wires are all ground wires. And you'll see that these ground wires need to go to quite a few points, and it's you know, you'll think, well, how do you connect all of those up? But you know, what I've actually done is you can jump these wires from point to point. So you can actually see that you know, all of these points. So we have like 1, 2, 3. They all need to be connected to ground. So I've just jumped it with a little short wire from the one to the next and the other, and then from there it's going to this plug over here. It's also going to the stepper driver, jumping to the next stepper driver, and then jumping to the other side of the 2 stepper drivers. And that's how you will connect those up. This also needs to go to the power supply. However, I haven't connected that up yet, but I can now then take that from any of these points and connect it to the power supply according to the wiring diagram. Right, so now that I've got a lot of this cabling done already, what I'm going to do is just move over to connecting these plugs, the wires from these plugs to the different stepper motors. So just to make it easy for myself so that I can remember what's going on, I've marked this stepper driver as the Z-axis, and I've marked this one as the X-axis, and then obviously the large one is the Y-axis. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to connect the wires from this plug to Z, that one to X, and this one to Y. And for that, what I've done is there's some wires some excess wire that we cut off from the stepper motors when we did that installation. And what I'm going to do is hopefully that's going to be enough wire for me to connect these plugs or these sockets up to my stepper drivers. So I'm going to start with the Z-axis. Now these plugs are marked. You can see there's a very small little number next to each one of these little prongs, and they start from 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's 1 at the top, 2 at the bottom right, 3 bottom left, 4 top left. Sorry, top right. And that's important to remember because when you're going to wire up the plugs that push into these sockets, you want to remember what number you need to solder what color wire to. Right, so I'm just going to go ahead and start with the green, and I'm going to mark that as number 2. It's a little bit tricky to see what's going on there. Right. And this one is going to be connected to one A. All right. Next, I'm going to go with black wire, and I am going to put that onto pin number 3, which is bottom left. And on the stepper motor, that goes into 1B. Right. The next color will be red. And I'm going to attach that to pin number 1. And that goes to 2A on the stepper driver. And the last one is going to go into pin number 4. It's the blue wire. And that goes into 2B on the stepper driver. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that for each one of these plugs connected to the remaining 2 stepper drivers. Right, so now you can see that I have soldered and connected the Z-axis, Y-axis, and also Z-axis, X-axis, and also the Y-axis wires. Now, one thing you have to remember with the Y-axis wires, and it actually indicates this on this wiring diagram, is that because we have 2 motors on the Y-axis, the one's on the left hand side and the other one is on the right hand side, what happens is that the motors actually turn opposite direction from each other, which means that we have to connect the wires in the opposite direction from each other. This is a very, very important thing that you have to remember. If you get this wrong, then you're going to mess up your machine. Right, so on the diagram, it actually indicates that that the wires are switched. Okay, I'm trying to make you see this better. Let me see if I can get the autofocus going. There we go. That the wires are switched. So you have your green and black wires remain the same on both. Okay, so you have black on both connected to one pin on the, or one input on the stepper driver, and then you have green also connected together for both motors. But then you have your red wire comes from the one motor, connects up with the blue wire from the other motor, and then connects into that pin. And then you have your blue wire coming from the one motor, connects up with the red wire from the other motor, and it goes into that pin. So now what I've opted to do is a little bit different. I've wired from the sockets. So let's say, for example, that the wires come from the motors, and there's a socket over there. Okay, so we have the plug and the socket. And what I'm going to do, so what I've done is from the socket, I've soldered the wires exactly as you see them here, okay, to there. So it's green, black, red, and blue, exactly as it's indicated here. However, on the other side of my socket, I've got the plug, and I'm going to do the swapping of the wires in that plug. But we'll get to that at a later stage. Just remember that you need to look out for that. Right, so I've removed the power supply from the box, and I'm now going to connect my positive and ground wires from the power supply to the rest of the circuit. So you'll see there's a V plus, and we have 1, 2, 3 points where we can connect it. I'm just selecting the one in the middle. Pop it in there and just make sure that it is secured very well. And then I also have my ground wire, and that is V minus, and that is going to one of these, 1, 2, 3 over there. Also just going to select the one in the middle. Doesn't really matter which one you select, so as long as it's one of those 3. Right. So we're also going to connect our fan to this, but we'll do that at a later stage. Now we also need to connect our ground, our mains ground, neutral and live wires onto these 3 points. So I've made up a couple of cables. This is my earth cable that is going to come from my power socket right there, and the other end of that is going to plug into earth on this side of the power supply. I've made the same cable for my live wire and also for my neutral wire. I've also made a little small jumper cable, because my live wire is going to go from the power socket to the one end of my emergency stop switch, and the jumper cable is going to go from the other side of the emergency stop switch to live on the power supply. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to connect these. We have live on this side, right, nice tight fit. We have neutral on this side, and this is my earth connection. Just to feed the wires through the hole. And then I can secure the plug and switch with screws. There we go. I think next what I'm going to do is connect my emergency stop switch. However, in order to get into there, I need to remove it. Right, so I have my live wire. Goes into this end. Now what you have to remember is that you'll see we have a orange and a green side. When the emergency switch is not pressed, this side gives us continuity, and then when it's pressed, it will break the circuit, and it will break the continuity running through here, and that is what breaks the system, or stops the system by breaking that power line. Right, so I can mount that again. Well, just doing it like that. Okay, so then on my power supply, we have live, neutral, and earth. So I'm going to connect up these now. I'm going to do earth first because it's on, actually sorry, no, I'm going to do live first. Just working from left to right. Then we have neutral, which is blue. That's going to go in there. And we have our earth wire. Right. So now I'm just going to flap this down. And that is what you end up with. Alright, so one of the last things to do here is to just connect up my stepper drivers to the power, and then also to connect the fan and the lid to the power supply. So when we switch on the box, the fan goes on automatically. Right, so I've connected up my negative and positive to the stepper drivers. I have all my mains wires connected, and now I have the lid here with a fan, and it has a positive and negative wire, and I'm just going to connect that to V minus and V plus, so the black goes to V minus. So you'll notice I've mentioned before there are 3 connectors there. You can connect them into any one of those 3 that is covered by the V minus sign, and then the positive wire will go to V plus. Right, so whenever we switch the system on, that fan will start blowing. Right, so now we can secure the power supply to our box again. Right guys, so I'm going to show you how to connect the plugs to the end of the wires. What I have here is the Z-axis wire, and what I've done is I have just stripped just a section, probably about 5 centimeters off the end of the wire, exposed the individual wires ends, and now I'm just going to tin them with solder. So just a light tin. Right. And you're going to be doing this for each one of the cables that you've got. Right, so next what I'm going to do is I cut a piece of heat shrink tubing, and I'm just going to slide that over the wire, and I'm just sliding it past. Then after you've disassembled your plug, you're going to take the nice shiny end, and that's going to go through here. And then you also see sometimes this gets stuck inside this plug, but it's actually a plastic sleeve, and that has to go in as well. Right, so now that I'm just putting it down so it doesn't get in my way. What we want to do now is we want to connect these wires to this end of the plug. So you'll see on the front of the plug you have numbers. And there's also a notch at the top. So if you hold the notch towards the top, the numbers go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now on the connections that I made in the box, okay, for the plugs in the box, or the sockets in the box, in the control box, I have red at number 1, I have green at number 2, I have black or yellow at number 3, and then I have blue at number 4. So just remembering that, we will now solder this to this plug. So I'm just positioning my notch towards the top so that I don't get confused. And now when we're looking from this side, one's going to be there, and that is my red wire. And I'm just laying a little bit of solder onto this onto that metal piece there, or metal pin. And then what we'll do is we'll connect red to to number 1. And then the other top one is 4, and that's going to be my blue wire. So just make sure you get a good connection there, right? Then I'm just going to turn it around with a notch towards the bottom so that I can access the remaining 2 connections. Right, and now we have, looking from this side, we have 2 on this side, 4 on that side, or sorry, 3 on that side. Right, so my green goes to number 2, which is there. So this is a little bit difficult because this thing is not clamping that well. Alright, I think that's a good enough connection. And the last one goes to number 3, and that is my black, or in my case a yellow wire. Right. So now we've made all the connections. You'll see I only stripped enough wire back so that there's enough to attach to the little spades, and there's no excess beyond that. Right, so now to close this plug up, we're just going to move this up like that, and you're just going to keep twisting it until it clips into place there, and then you give it one turn and then it locks into place. And then there's a very, very fiddly screw on this side, which I'm going to try and put in, but I might actually, oh, wait a minute, it looks like I might wanted to do this off camera because it's very fiddly, but I got lucky on this one. Right, and then I'm just going to move my heat shrink tubing, and I'm going to push it into this socket until it can't go any further, and then I can flip this collar around again, and I can tighten all the screws, heat shrink the tubing, and you're done. Now please note, this is the plug for the x-axis, and I did exactly the same on this plug as I did for the one on the z-axis. It's precisely the same. The colors go in exactly the same positions on this plug. However, for the y-axis we have 2 motors, which means we have 2 wires, one coming from each motor. Now I've marked mine, this wire comes from the motor. If you're standing in front of your CNC machine with your router facing you, this is on the right and this one is on the left. And what we have to do is we have to swap some of the wires. So normally where you have a red wire going to pin number 1, so let's say this is the left motor, we have a red wire going to pin number 1. On your right motor, you are going to combine that with the blue wire from the right motor. And then on pin number 4, where the blue goes for your motor that's on the left, you're going to combine with the motor on the right. You're going to combine that with the red wire from the motor on the right. So you have blue going with red and red going with blue. So I hope that makes sense. It's very clear on the diagram that you can download from the website. Yeah. And so just before I forget, the rest is quite simple. Yellow goes with yellow, or black with black. In my case it's yellow, and green goes with green. Green goes to pin number 2, and black or yellow goes to pin number 3. So one of the things I want to show you here is the position of the dip switches on the different stepper driver boards. So for the y-axis we have this stepper driver module, and you'll see these dip switches here that we need to set to a specific state. Now this is the upside down, but we have 1 going through to 8, and then on is the up position and off is the down position. So what we have here, we have on 1 going from 1 to 8, we have off, on, off, on, off, on, and on. Right, on the stepper drivers for the X and Z axis, we have dip switches over here. Let me just see if I can focus there a little bit better. Okay, and it goes from 1 on the left to 4 on the right, and both of them you can set exactly the same. So 1 would be, and on is at the top and off is at the bottom. So 1 would be on, so the switch is up, 2 is off, 3 is off, and 4 is on. So it's basically on, off, on. And exactly the same for the x-axis dip switches. This is very important to get your steps correct. Something else I also want to show you on the X and Z stepper driver boards is small little pots that we need to, or variable resistors that we need to set. Now it's a little bit dark there, I don't know if you can see, but right next to the dip switches is a little blue square, and it's got a little white cross in the middle, and we can actually set the amperage for each stepper driver motor. So that's for the x-axis, and this is for the z-axis. On your x-axis motor, which is a NEMA 23, that runs at about 1.5 amps. So you want to set your current pot to about 1.5 amps. Now it starts from 0 at the bottom and it goes around to this end. The writing on it is very, very small. I can't really see what that is, but what you want to do is just find 1.5 amp within this circle, and then just use a screwdriver, turn it all the way to 0, and then turn it back until you reach 1.5 amps. On the Z-axis, we have I think it's a NEMA 17 stepper motor. I have a 1.2 amp version, and for that the recommended current is 1 amp. So I'm going to set this pot on my Z-axis to 1 amp. If you have a 1.7 amp motor, you can set that up to 1.5 amps. So in order to make your machine work, we need to download some software. First of all, we're going to go to the makerslide.co.za website. We're going to hover over downloads and click on software. If you're on a Windows-based machine, you want to download Xloader, so just click on it and then click the download button. You also want to download version 0.9 of the Garble software or the file that's used on the Arduino Uno. So click on that and then also just click on download. If you are on a Mac-based machine, instead of Xloader, we can use Hex Uploader. So you can just search for that on Google. I think it's on paulkaplan.me, and then click here on download the app, and that will download it to your downloads folder. So in order to flash our Garble file to our Arduino, you're going to connect up your Arduino with a USB cable to your computer. I'm on a Mac, so I'm using Hex Uploader. If you're on a PC, you're going to be using X Uploader. I would imagine that the setup would be very similar. Under Arduino type, you are going to choose Uno 80MEGA328P. Serial port, that should look something like that, USB serial -1460, or depending on what port you use, it might be 1440. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to go with upload hex file, and then I'm going to go select my hex file from my desktop. It's that one over there, the one that I downloaded, and I'm going to click open. And you would see now that it is writing, and we're just going to give that some time to finish. There we go. It's all done. Right, so we can now close this application again, and we've now just flashed that file to the Arduino. So you can now plug out your USB from your computer, or if you have using it on a different machine, connected to your CNC, a different computer connected to your CNC, you can go plug that Arduino back in there, and then we are going to open up Universal G-Code Sender, and we're going to see if we are able to control the machine. So once you've plugged your machine back in with all the X, Y, and Z plugs, you've connected it to the power and switched it on, and then also connected your USB plug to your computer. You can continue to Universal G-Code Sender that you've downloaded. So I'm just opening up the folder, and I'm clicking on Universal G-Code Sender.jar. And that opens up this window over here. And then I'm going to go over here. So just check your port. You want to select, it's going to look like something like this, dev/tty.usb serial -1440. Yours might be a little bit different. The baud rate is 115200, and then you're just going to go open, and then you'll see over here your G-code is going to load from your board, and it's going to say OK. So now what we want to do is we want to just jog the machine around a little bit and actually see if it does work. So I'm going to use small increments. So I'm just going to go over here at the XY step size and input 10. The same with the Z axis. I've set my feed rate just a little bit faster, but for this I'll just do it a little bit slower. Right, so let's start with so just make sure that your axes are more or less towards the center, so that you don't crash into the sides if something goes wrong. Of course, you also have the emergency stop switch, or just the main power switch that you can switch off in case anything goes wrong. So we're just going to move into the Y direction, 10 millimeters. Alright, so that's moving, and we're going to go move back. Right, we've got X, yes, and then we also have the Z axis. Right, so that's definitely moving. So I'm just going to make some larger moves, changing the step size to 100, and we're going to move Y back slightly. right, and forward. The same with X. Okay, so that seems to work well.